It's time to introduce the first keynote speaker. And I would like to welcome Niklas Zandén on stage here. Niklas is a professor at Göteborg University and head of the Center for Business in Society in Göteborg University. And his main area of research is how sustainability can be integrated into a business strategy.
Yes,
please,
and
welcome on stage.
Welcome on stage.
All right, thank you. Yeah, it is a bit interesting to be live. Hate Zoom. So it's really lovely to be here and having a chance to talk about strategy and sustainability that I really like to talk about and that I do a lot of research on and that I think is massively important, and we'll go through this. So the structure is basically this. I'll tell you a little bit what do we know from research on how you try to integrate sustainability into strategy. More on what do we know on actually how it is being done, not how people tell you that it should be done. There's a lot of 2x2 matrices and 5-step processes and everything, but the truth is that much of that hasn't got much empirical data behind it. So there's a lot of thinking by smart people on how you should do it. Doesn't necessarily mean that that works. So what we're going to try and do is bring you into my field, which is more management and organization, and see what do we know from those cases where we follow firms and see how they actually try and do it, and what can we learn from that in terms of how to integrate sustainability into strategy. And going to try and exemplify that with what came as close to from the cases that I'm studying as non-software as possible. So I'm trying to figure out what cases do I have that are not that software in the feeling of it. And I ended up with Nudie jeans, you know, a product that has been the same for 100 years, jeans. It's very basic. You're going to repair them, you're going to do all these things. Very kind of hands-on, physical, in a sense, not boring, but very mundane product. And see, even within that story, how software matters and how the integration of sustainability into the strategy of a company like Nudie Jeans is dependent on software to some extent in this, and in what way. If I would have taken an easier case like Geting or a medtech or something like that, we could talk about connectivity of all these things, or AI, and you know, it's easier. So let's take a case where it's more difficult to start us off, and see how it works out in such a case. So I got a roughly 15 to 20 minutes to talk. The advantage that I have is that I talk really fast. So it's like having 40 minutes for me. Let's see if you agree if it's really an advantage in the end, but yeah. All right. So the theme is simply, how do we integrate sustainability into strategy? That's the idea. And the notion has been, and I still think this holds. This is an old quote from Michael Porter, person that I very rarely agree with, but here is once in life I agree with him, so it's nice to have him on a slide on strategy. And he said this a few years back. The fact is the prevailing approach to CSR, whether we use CSR and sustainability, doesn't matter. I use them interchangeably. We can have a debate around that if you want to. They're so fragmented and disconnected from business and strategy as to obscure many of the greatest opportunities for companies to benefit society. So this is the idea. We do sustainability in firms, and we do business and strategy. Both are good. Both could even be profitable, but they're not necessarily that connected. So you have a staff function doing sustainability, you have a lovely report with a tree and some kids running around, and you sponsor some things, and you put some solar cells up, and you know, you have some CO2 targets, and you do a sustainable development goals, 17 goals, and you map them, and you have circles and colors, and you know, great. You may even have a few hundred people doing that. Could even be profitable, right? Could build your brand and could build your employer branding and everything else you want to do in life. But it doesn't really connect into the core of the strategy of your firm. Oftentimes, rather the opposite. It's a structure created to kind of buffer your core from the noise of sustainability, in a sense. To sort out your supply chain, for example, that you placed in certain countries because you wanted it to be there, and then you asked the sustainability people to come in and clean up the mess that you created. So that's normally the way that we think about this, or has been one of the ways. And the problem with that approach is it's problematic potentially for your business, and it's problematic potentially for society, because you're not going to spend billions if it's not connected to strategy. You get a few million to play around with. But you're not going to get billions to do things if it's not connected to the products, the services, and the markets that you're after. So the claim from Michael Porter then was, it can be much more than a cost, a constraint, or a charitable deed. It can be a source of his favorite word in life, competitive advantage. And whether that's true or not, I think is an open question, right? For some firms, this will hold. It's a win-win. For some firms, maybe not. And even if it is a win-win, the big job is to find that win-win. It's not like it's magically just going to pop up like a trisslott when it's like, oh, here we go, I just won, I figured out how to connect them. The job is hard and takes years and is quite difficult. And that's what we'll talk about. How do you find that connection? And we'll do that in relation to a very simple idea about strategy. Simple, but still I find quite useful and powerful in this thing. So we're back early on, 80s strategy research on this thing, with a simple realization that strategy is a combination of two things. One, some sort of plan, top-down idea pushed into the organization. Sometimes that works, and sometimes that doesn't work. And when it doesn't work, we talk about implementation problems or the difficulty of change projects and the inability of people that we work with to understand the brilliance of our fantastic ideas that we had. But then we also realize there is one other component always, almost, and this is emergent strategy. The things that wasn't, when they were done, being intended to have strategic outcomes. They weren't supposed to be strategic. They were done for other reasons. But over years, you realize, oh God, that was the key thing. That's the things that became then strategy. So we talk about that as emergent strategies. And this model is useful in relation to sustainability, we're finding in the studies that we're doing, because it's becoming quite clear that it's difficult to push sustainability through the normal top-down processes. Companies that have tried to integrate sustainability into their strategy through the classic top-down planning, change projects, etc., seem to face quite a lot of difficulties. People don't understand why. Is this just a greenwashing kind of, is this just a talk level? So people in the organization don't understand if top management really means this. Top management in general don't have that much competence on sustainability, so it's difficult to push something down if you don't know that much about it. It's quite long term, so it's hard to push something down that the middle manager says, oh yeah, maybe in the future, but not now. And there is all of these issues coming from the top on how to push it down. So it's quite difficult to do it. On the other hand, luckily, on sustainability, a lot of things are bubbling in the organization. So a lot of people care about sustainability, so they do skunk work, or they do other issues, initiatives, and they work with different stakeholders, and they get government funding. And you're part of the ecosystem of trying to save the world. And there's a lot of things going on in the organization. So it's easier maybe to grow things in relation to sustainability than regular things from the bottom up. And it's harder to push them down. So we need that emergent component to this thing. And that's what I'm going to try and talk about, but also then relate that to the software idea on this thing. Because the software doesn't tend to emerge only, but it tends to kind of, at least in some of the cases that I looked at, has to be some sort of infrastructure put in place. So there is that kind of top-down component to it to allow the bottom-up things to flourish in this. So let's make it simple. Let's take a pair of jeans, simple jeans. Most of you guys wear them. And let's take a Gothenburg-based company. Why not, right? Nudie jeans. Small little company. Gothenburg turnover is like 50 million euros, so it's not a big one. Started in 2001 and grew, but profitable. Profitable in an industry that has faced a lot of difficulties and now recognized as a leader on sustainability. The journey for Nudie, and I don't have the time to go through everything, even though I speak quickly. The journey is exactly this combination of the two. On the one hand, starting with not a Porter formal plan. I mean, this is a startup SME kind of thing when it starts. There's very few SMEs on this level that have a clear Porter version of a 5-force analysis and a SWOT and everything else in life. But some sort of plan from the top of wanting to do the right thing. In the dirty industry, wanting at least to be reasonably good, be able to sleep at night, as the framing often is. Love of the product. So always, love our stuff. Never throw anything away. Love the jeans. Love the product. And this idea of old is beautiful. Very strange in the fashion industry. And they would probably argue that they're not in the fashion industry, but let's, for the sake of it, argue that they are in the fashion industry. Have this idea that old is beautiful instead of new. So old, aging, vintage, second hand, that tradition. So you have that with you. And then a lot of the things that you're now seeing, if you go into a Nudie store, or if you go to the website, you see, oh, they repair your stuff for free. Oh, they sell second-hand stuff. Oh, they do reused products, where they take things back and redo them. A lot of those things just emerged over the years. Things came from opening a store and someone was good at sewing, they started to repair, then people realized, oh, that's a nice thing. So it was just a customer service thing, no plan of it being strategic. It lived for 6-7 years in the organization with no plan of being strategic. Headquarter people then realized, oh, we can get our jeans fixed. Let's go down to one of the stores. The Naturskyddsföreningen, should have known what that is in English, but I don't, had a clothes swapping day in Gothenburg, and they had to do something. So why not do repairs? And people came, and they were happy, and let's scale it up. Let's do this we're going to repair everything. No calculations on that, how much that's going to cost, and how that will go out. And so this is the kind of story on almost any of the components in what is now Nudie Jeans, up until this point, the first 10 years, when things came together and they started to realize this. So at this stage, it was very much ad hoc and things were being done. But something happened, and this is kind of where the story really starts for us, is, once you're there, once you figured out that we are part now of trying to do this on sustainability and integrating it, a few things came to their mind, and here is where software played a crucial role in a lot of things. I started studying them in 2012-13, so I tend to like to follow companies for a long period of time, doing a lot of interviews, like over hundreds, and be there a lot to have details. And in real time, because when you ask someone in retrospect, they're going to lie. They're going to tell the story of how things are supposed to go, but when you look at it in real time, there is politics and there is a mess. And I like the mess. And here is what happened. So they decided to go transparent. The buzzword of if it's not software and AI, it's transparency in the field of sustainability, and has been for the last 5-7 years. Everyone's supposed to be transparent, and that's supposed to solve things in life. So one thing that you're supposed to be transparent about is your production, your chain, where you produce. The reason is because someone thinks that if you're transparent, we can sort out the mess that you have in your supply chains, which is probably true for all of your companies in here, that it's a mess in your supply chains generally. And the idea would be, let's see if we can go transparent. And Nudies, being quite small and control freaks about their products, could actually detail their supply chain. Then the problem was, this could be done quite quickly on some sort of overall product level in 2013. Then someone came to this idea, shouldn't we be able to trace a single product all the way through? Wouldn't that be cool? Like you have a specific jeans, not just jeans and the style, but I want to know, like for this one, on a batch level or even an individual pair. And I was like, yeah, that's what we want. Like people going like QR codes, and this is everything we want. You can just scan it and you can see exactly what it is, and then you can bring it, you return them, and now I can scan a second-hand one, and I can see where it's been produced and how people have used it, and look at the story. They love the stories. So the story of the worn jeans. And so this is already there, 2012-13. They're still not there in terms of 2021. They're getting closer now, because they just spent like 6-7 years investing in the IT structures for all their different systems to start communicating with each other, so there is some sort of reasonable possibility of getting this data to the market. Which just indicates exactly this. So it's easy to take maybe one step forward on some of this thing, but if you want to do what they wanted to do, it just launched it in terms of CO2 emissions from each step of the production process. Not only do you have to go down and figure out what your supplies are and get them to report in some sort of reasonable way, which is hard enough, but then you got to get that information connected with all the other systems that you have communicating with each other. And I'm not the software guy, you guys are. I don't know why I'm here, but you know much more than I do about this thing. I can only tell you kind of from the naive, stupid outside world what this looks like if you want to work with strategy on it. But this is very difficult, apparently. And it always fails, and it takes longer than you expect, and it costs more. So it's like any other building project, I guess, in life. But the interesting thing is that and those changes were not made to do this thing, right? The infrastructure changes and the investments in the software weren't necessarily, made just to do transparency. But once they were there, it allowed so much more things to be done. And those ideas that were there partly from the start, and those ideas that bubbled up. I mean, it was social issues in 2013, and then CO2 came, and that became the issue. And then sustainability part could figure out, oh, we can now do this, and we can do that, and we can link it to these things, because now we have that system in place that allows us to actually grow things and ideas a bit from the bottom, right? And very much is the same case of repair. The simplest, the physical thing of repairing. You bring your jeans in and they repair them for you. What do you need to do that? You need a store. Unless you're going to ship everything all around the world. And you need that store. The problem is the store is not profitable. There's no, pandemic has extremely well shown this thing as well. It's really difficult to run profitable stores. So now you need stores to have a sewing machine to repair, because that's the biggest sustainability impact probably that Nudie has. Lovely with transparency, but the biggest thing is repair your stuff and don't buy new things. That's the thing. Don't buy things, don't wash them, and don't just use the same stuff and don't wash them. There we go. That's your fancy sustainability. You can add as much software or AI or whatever you want to. That's what it is in government. Don't buy stuff and don't wash them. We're done. The thing is, though, that to make that happen in a world where we wash things more and we throw them away and we like new things, that's the challenge of that consumer behavior, is the challenge of doing this. And repairing it is apparently one thing that works, because people like to, they may like their jeans and they like it for someone for free to repair them, because they're not going to do it themselves and they're not going to find the tailor to do it. But if you can just go to the store, drop them off, and you get them back for free, hey, fantastic. So now we expand the lifetime of a pair of jeans, almost double them. The problem is then you have to have the stores. And now the interesting thing comes with all these investments that Nudie have been doing in creating this omni-channel between the online that is massively profitable and the physical stores that are not very profitable, but you need them to create some sort of presence in the market. Once you start to get these things coming together, and once you start investing in what they did a lot for, data crunching and AI and on customers, and understanding the customers and using quite advanced software things to understand the customers, getting the customer into the store and repair, you get their data. You have to sign up to the club, you have to do a lot of things, so you get the data from a customer. And that data could be used. So suddenly, they're able now to use the stores as warehouses where they can ship throughout the world. So you have a store in Australia, then you can use that as a shipping hub, and you can do things on that after hours. You can use that to collect customer information that you can then crunch and create a value for that customer that you can then move maybe online or communicate with. And suddenly, that store has a value thanks to the software development that makes it at least potentially profitable to open more stores. And if you open more stores, you get more repair. If you get more repair, you expand the lifetime of a pair of jeans, we buy less, and we save the world, which was your argument, right? Do we save the world thanks to software? And the argument was, maybe. At least a little bit, or at least we die slower by doing this, right? If we don't get there all the way, right? It's a bigger issue. But there is something quite fascinating about this thing on how those type of investments in infrastructure and in the software is allowing new things to happen in the organization, and how the existing ideas, or how ideas bubbling in the organization and things happening, could tie itself into those infrastructures, of course, if the people working there also know them. So clearly, you then need to have people in your organization that understand some of the software things, even if they don't work with it necessarily all the time, but they understand how they can use it, or why it's important that as soon as anyone walks into that store, you get them to sign up to the Nudie Jeans Club, or whatever it's called. And the idea is simply because otherwise GDPR doesn't allow you to use the data. So you need to get them to sign off so that you can get their data, so you can use the data, so then you can increase the value, lifetime value of that customer. But if you start understanding these things and how that is be able to use these things, then this becomes interesting. So that's basically my story. We need to have that from a top management to have those investments, because they're long-term. They're unclear. It's not going to bubble up with an infrastructure on software suddenly in an organization. There may be ideas popping up in different places, but some of that part is in the same way as US top management have to say, we want to move in a direction of sustainability. If top management doesn't say that, it's very difficult to grow anything. So you have to have some sort of direction and an idea. The same thing is you have to have some of the infrastructure in place and have to dare to take some of those investments for things to be able to grow, emerge into becoming strategy. So you may have to invest on something that is a hope of something to emerge 3 years from now, which is very difficult to motivate in an investment calculation. The idea that something will happen, maybe that I don't know what will happen, but it's likely to maybe happen. And it will be great, maybe. But I guess that's why, you know, if you're top management, that's what your job is. So in that sense, there's nothing strange with it. So to summarize, software could be important for many different reasons. Possibility to integrate it could be dependent on these things like transparency. The scaling that you need to do to be able to grow things could be dependent on this thing in the sense of repairing and this thing in Nudie. And of course, you know, as we hear a lot about probably later on today, the software kind of driven innovations and other things in itself. There's a ventilator from Getinge, for example, that you start to connect and they emit a lot of greenhouse gases. And you know, once you start connecting them, you can monitor them through the use of all of those things. You can lower the emissions quite dramatically on how doctors use these ventilators. You know, all of those solutions, which I think we'll have a lot of discussion about today, right? So I wanted to do the other thing, which is the more basic, boring stuff. And then we can go into the fancy stuff of look at all these cool products as well and how we can possibly, you know, make a business out of them. And I'll say, yeah, that's a good argument. But you can also make the other argument, which is just we need the infrastructure. And with that said, I'm done. And you guys are here, and I have like 30 seconds.
Thank you, Niklas.